Welcome to Coffee with a Purpose, everyone. It's just us this time. We don't have a external featured speaker. Instead, we've got a bunch of you that have bravely volunteered to walk us through these 5 ballot questions on the state ballot. I know there had been some talk as well about wanting to have continued discussion on the remaining articles on the fall town meeting warrant, and that will definitely make for a very busy morning. Maybe I should just start by asking, is that still a desire? Do we want to try to reserve any time for town meeting stuff, or can we pretty much use all of our time for the ballot questions?
Well, it turns out that, well, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brinley.
I was just going to say, I can chime in by saying I'm a town meeting member and have done my homework, so I don't need for us to discuss it. I had just wanted to, when I had mentioned that, it was just because I had wanted to share with others about what's up and why I'd be voting the way I would be voting, but I certainly don't need it.
Yeah.
I would concur with that.
Okay.
Yeah, so it turns out town meeting has been working in record time, and it's really quite heartening. And the only things left are the charter and bylaws material and the citizens petitions. And we certainly have covered the citizens petitions pretty well in our last session. So I think that one is covered. And I don't know if anyone has anything to say about that.
I just wanted to ask, did ADU get covered? The ADU?
No, actually, that accessory dwelling unit actually is the only zoning article that got postponed. So that's postponed until, I think, this next session. Tuesday.
It's supposed to come up this next session, but I highly doubt it. It's the last on the list, and my guess is there'll be too much happening with the rest of it, since all of the other petitions are on there with the gas blowers and the turf fields, and so I'm guessing that we won't actually get to it on Tuesday, and that we'll meet on Thursday for that one. And I will say, just if we're not going to discuss it, that I do hope that people who are in support of it will email their representatives, their town meeting members and other people, and please ask them to vote.
Okay, cool. I'm also thinking that we can probably dispense with the normal introductions again, since it's pretty much just all of us regular folks. But so with that being said, I think that means we can devote I guess 10 to 15 minutes maybe on each of these questions. And then maybe if we aim for about 10 minutes or spec more, and then we can kind of revisit ones, but that'll give us a chance to cover all 5 for sure. So and again, thanks to you that volunteered to research and present on these. And the first one up is the state auditor's authority to audit the legislature, which Bill, I believe, volunteered to educate us on.
I did. And I wanted to give you a little bit of background. I offered to do the research on this. I was curious because there are, I'm aware of at least 2 different types of audits, and I just want to share a little bit about it. There are straight financial audits where you look at the numbers and you see whether the money is spent according to how it's supposed to be spent. And then there are what I call operational audits, which are audits that identify whether the money is spent wisely, whether it's spent for the purpose intended, and whether it's spent efficiently. My background, which is one of the reasons I offered to do this, is the first 6 years of my career with New York State was with the New York State Comptroller. The New York State Comptroller, similar to the Audit General, is an independently elected public official and is responsible for auditing the rest of state government. I was not able to find out whether the New York State Comptroller audits the New York State Legislature, but they do audit state agencies. And my training as an auditor in that department was that we looked out for, we were the watchdogs for the taxpayer. We looked out to make sure the money was spent wisely, and that the money was spent efficiently so the taxpayer got the greatest bang for the buck. So if that was what the state auditor was trying to do, I would be in favor of it. So I did confirm that the legislature is audited annually. I finally found the 206-page report that is issued every year by the Office of the State Controller. It's a financial audit. It identifies what the budget was and how much was spent. And it's detailed to the penny. And it's 206 pages long. It does not ask questions around whether or not that money was spent wisely. It's audited by a CPA firm. I found the firm. I didn't read the audit. It's a little long for me. So I don't know whether another part of a regular audit is what's called a management letter, or at least it was when I was active. And that would identify issues around controls or around issues that should be improved. If there was a management letter, and there may have been, it was not included in this report, and it's not, to my knowledge, it's not public. But again, I didn't look really hard for it, but I didn't find it. So we've got a financial audit. We know the money was spent. That's good to know, but it's not the question that the state auditor was looking for. State auditor, I think, wants to look further and see whether this money is spent wisely. So my research, I couldn't find a clear answer as to what the state auditor wants to do. The public material says they want the right to audit the legislature, but they don't say what they want to audit. I think most of us here, at least I believe, the legislature is pretty opaque. That the committee legislative votes may or may not be public depending on the committee. We have, we're, I guess, the 47th state as far as transparency. So I think having someone else shed a little light on this is a good thing. But I'm not sure they'll get very far because this has been challenged and will probably be challenged and may in fact not hold up. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to get more light shed on the issue. So personally, I'm going to vote yes, because I think oversight is good, but I'm pretty confident it'll be challenged. So that's all I got. I'll be happy to try and answer questions.
Did you want to?
Sarah?
Yeah, so I absolutely 110% agree with you that the legislature is way too opaque, and you know, we need to shine a little sunshine on what they're up to. And I had been very seriously looking at voting yes, and my one concern came up fairly recently reading an editorial in the Globe, which I think unfortunately may have made its way into my recycling pile, and I don't remember who it was written by. But saying, and maybe this is part of what you're referring to with the challenge, but that there could be a constitutional issue with this, in that it's effectively the executive branch overseeing the legislative branch, and that you know, goes against the idea of keeping those branches of government separate. So I think I'm going to vote yes as well anyway, and wait for the challenge, and you know, hope that if nothing else, just sends a message that it really would be good to clean up some of these backroom practices they have. But I just is that when you refer to it being challenged, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, yes, and I saw that too, Sarah. It's in the general material, I believe. But my struggle is this: the state auditor is elected by the people of Massachusetts. It's not the, I mean, it's referred to in here as the executive branch, but it's not. It's its own independent branch. So there are constitutional issues. There are questions. I'm sure it will be challenged. But again, that doesn't change my desire to see more accountability.
Yeah, no, I think I'm in exactly the same place you are. I just wanted to see, what your thoughts about that were. I do feel like we need some more openness and accountability of what's going on Beacon Hill. So
So it may be flawed, but voting yes sends a message of voter intent for more transparency, it sounds like so far. Um,
My
are
hope.
there, what was that, Bill?
That's my hope.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
shed some light.
yeah. Are there others on the call that see it differently or think that there would be either that the audit shouldn't happen or that voting yes would send the wrong message somehow? Or Kathleen?
Yeah, I'm not quite answering your question, but I'm just thinking that I was a little surprised to hear about the document that Bill found, that we do in fact have an audit that shows what money has been spent, not the wisely part. So I think maybe a piece of the problem here is people don't know there already is this one document that they could consult. I think my other observation is when we're talking about transparency, if this audit is already out there, I think what we're really talking about is knowing how committees are voting and what stands people are taking on particular issues. And this this vote is not going to change that piece of transparency, unfortunately. But I do agree with Doug that it does send a message that people are looking for more transparency and might light a little fire under some of the committees to be more transparent about their votes.
Mm-hmm. Brinley, you had your hand up, but then you lowered it, I think. Did you?
Well, I was going to kind of say the same thing,
Oh,
and
okay.
I was going to bring up the fact that when you listen to everybody's, there's been a lot of talk going on. So Channel 5 has done reviews, WBR has done reviews. There's just tons and tons of people out there who's done reviews about this. And when you listen to a lot of them, it's interesting that the conversation kind of always seems to end up at the end talking more about Diana than the actual question and how much political capital this is potentially going to cost her. And it seems like it really that this question doesn't become about the those of us wanting more transparency. It ends up becoming more political. So I think it's going to be a very interesting thing to see how this question goes. I agree with everything we said before. I intend to vote yes because I want more transparency. I don't think this is going to end up holding anybody accountable, but I do think this is an interesting it's a really strong political move for her and could cost her next time coming around. So I do think that it's a pretty big deal.
Interesting. Huh. Cindy, you've got your hand up. You got to come off mute, Cindy.
I was just going to say that I was planning to vote no, because it seemed like it was crossing a constitutional line. But having heard the presentation and what other people are saying, I think I will vote yes because of sending a message. And I'm remembering the WBUR presentation, and the pro supporter said admittedly that this is a first salvo in the, which I don't particularly like that language, but in an effort to gain more transparency in the legislature, just exactly because it does send a message. And I hadn't really thought of the fact that if it does cross a line, then somebody's going to figure out how much of this can actually happen. So thank you.
Cool. All right. Good. Sorry, Rick, did you want to say something? You're on mute at the moment. Rick? You, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I already voted yes on this. However, to send a message, and however, it occurs to me that what the Supreme Court of the United States has done to indemnify the executive branch, I'm a little hesitant to show in our state that we also want more power in the executive. Now, I don't know who we'd be showing that to, so it may be a fervent distinction, that I'm just, but I've already voted yes. So I'm really just throwing that out there in case anybody else had a similar feeling about it. I don't think it's going to pass in any event. So, I mean, I don't think it'll be constitutional in any event. So, but.
Well, that's interesting where it's kind of two different questions that make it.
There's nothing to do
with
with
the vote, but not be constitutional. Yeah.
But I think even if it's ultimately decided not to be constitutional, maybe I'm hoping that it will put some pressure on the legislature to move at least a little bit out of the
I hate
dark
to be a
side,
cynic, but the only thing that's going to put any pressure on them is to start voting them out of office.
I may be ridiculously naively optimistic. So I totally get that.
I mean, more people like Galen running on transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Patel will watch our recording of this and chuckle along.
Yeah.
But, all right.
Cool. There was one in Cambridge who did even better on transparency. State rep for Cambridge.
What happened?
In the primary, there was a really close election in Cambridge.
Oh, okay, that one. Yeah.
Also in the transparency issue. So maybe it's going to be a little bit of a trend, hopefully.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Bill, for doing that one and for everybody who contributed. Let's move on to the second question, which I think probably lots more people already have maybe opinions on the potential elimination of MCAS. Brinley, do you want to
Sure.
do an overview for us on that one?
Sure. In thinking about how to present this, I thought I would just say the what up, a little history, and then the sides. So, question 2, a yes vote stops the requirement for graduation only. It doesn't stop MCAS testing or change the testing in any way. It just stops the requirement to graduate from high school passing the 10th grade MCAS test. A no vote makes no change at all to the current MCAS structure for Massachusetts. The people on the yes side are predominantly the Massachusetts Teacher Association. They have put a lot of money into this. And Senator Warren. On the no side is the Healy administration and the Attorney General. The yes side says that it hurts low-income, marginalized ELL, which is English language learning students and communities the most, that it shouldn't be the gold standard requirement because it leaves a lot out. There are less than 1% of students that fail because of not passing the MCAS test, and the majority of those are students with cognitive issues, learning disabilities, and English language learners. The teachers talk about teaching to the test, and the stringent curriculum requirements, and the fact that it really leaves an enormous amount of what else is really needed to survive in life past high school, including for school and including for higher education like college and universities. The no side says that it means that we would be one of the few states that doesn't have a standardized test to meet for graduation. They're saying that it would allow the 300 plus districts that we have to make their own requirements for graduation. They say that there is an appellate process already in place to try to overcome. If they don't pass the test, they can go try to appeal. I can say that it's very time consuming and difficult. Students can repeat the test as many times so that they can graduate. What's that mean? I don't remember that note. Sorry. This seems to be on the no side. It seems to be all about the high standards, the high qualities of Massachusetts teaching and education, and that this single test holds the everything about accountability. They're saying that if this isn't in place, students will stop caring, teachers will stop caring, and people won't make an effort to pass anymore. There's no evidence of that in place, but that's what they're saying. Just a little history so that people know the MCAS is the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System. It's not required by federal law, but participation in it is mandated by state and federal law. It was created so I'm going to read this because it's easier than me summarizing it. The Every Student Succeeds Act, which is ESSA, which is how we got a lot of funding during COVID, how we get a lot of funding regularly, requires states to administer assessments in English language arts, mathematics, and science during high school. There's no federal law requiring any consequences for students from these exams. So this requirement to have this is a state thing and not a federal thing. There's nothing that says that they have to pass it because of that. MCAS exams were created in 1993 for an education law reform, and the whole point of them was to boost school performance and increase accountability. It is a part of what helps funding for schools, and the point was to try to bring more funding to lower performing districts. Okay. My opinions about this. Having had 2 kids in the public school system, still having one who will have to pass this test, and listening to them. So 10th grade MCAS isn't the only time kids take it. They also take it in 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 8th, I think, are the grades. Don't quote me on that one. I can't remember exactly, but they take it a lot. So it's not the only time they see a standardized test. None of that is going to go away with this. They're all still going to take all of those. I will say, from listening to kids and teachers over the past 15 years that I've been paying such close attention to the schools, is that it really does create an enormous amount of anxiety. I can say for my family, it created anxiety in one kid and less so than the other. I will say that teachers consistently across the board already tell the kids not to stress over this test. So they already spend a lot of their time trying to lessen the emphasis on passing this test. The only time they really talk about passing it is in 10th grade for the 10th grade test, because it is a requirement for graduation. They do spend a lot of time teaching to it. The no side tries to say that they don't, but I'm in it. I've been in it, and they do. Teachers absolutely spend time teaching to the test. They don't teach outside of it. They literally teach it. The MCAS, the state has practice tests, and the teachers spend a lot of time going through those practice tests with the kids and teaching specifically how to answer those specific questions. So it definitely does cut into regular curriculum time. It's also not true that it's the only standard requirement. DESE has a lot of requirements. DESE is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for Massachusetts, and they require a lot of things for students to graduate. Number of hours in school, number of days in school, the standards that they have to take in types of classes. So it's really, in my opinion, unfair to say that it's the only thing that would be standardized. It's the only test that's standardized. It's not the only rules to graduation that are in there. So from my personal perspective, I will be voting yes to eliminate it. I do think that it is an unnecessary single requirement for graduation. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks for that overview, and particularly summarizing what you see as both the pros and cons. There's actually aspects of what you said that I hadn't realized yet. So let's just open it up. Who's, let's see, Judy, have you got your hand up?
Yeah,
I just like to back up what Brinley has said. I spent the last 13 years in the Natick Public Schools. I also worked with students who had, severe special needs. And in order for them to get, a graduation, a degree, their teachers had to develop an alternate portfolio. That was ridiculous and time consuming. It was based on, like, you would set a goal for a child who might never master algebra. You might set a goal that was appropriate for them, but through rote work, you would collect samples. It was an inordinate amount of time with very little learning attached to it. I would also just say that, by keeping the test, as a non-graduation requirement, it's a great tool to look at school performance. You can look at individual schools, you can look at individual teacher results. So when things tank, you can say, hey, what's going on here? What are we missing in our curriculum that we need to boost? What's going on in this particular community where MCAS scores are tanking? It can be a great diagnostic tool for continually, using it as one measure, to indicate when improvements are needed or pivots are needed or different, curricula or activities are needed to, reach particular curriculum goals.
Yeah, Martin, yeah.
I guess our son was probably in the rollout year of MCAS. I can't quite remember, but it was pretty new, and that we're really concerned about teaching to the test at that point. I've done adult training in terms of job training where we did particularly Excel, and it was really kind of staggering to see what people didn't know. For example, Excel, you can format your numbers, you can format decimals into percentages or into fractions. And people didn't know that 0.5 was the same as a half, was the same as 50%. So I had to come up with some remedial curriculum to teach them things like that and some other math things that I would have hoped that everybody had already known. So I guess my question, I don't know if there's an answer, is when we talk about teaching to the test, if they're learning how to do things like that, I would call those basic skills that they have to learn, that they really need to learn anyway. So how much of this teaching to the test is
That's a
basic
third
skills?
grade skill that you just described. It's a third grade skill.
Yeah.
I've witnessed it. It's taught over and over again, so. I don't know if you were.
Yeah, so I feel like
An inner city population of just 10 years. It's like really.
I feel like an interesting, sorry, is it okay if I chime in on that?
Yeah, go ahead. And then I know Rick wants to talk and Sarah wants to talk, if I can figure out.
Yeah, I feel like an interesting way to understand this, which is something that I did starting with third grade, is to go to DESE. If you Google, later I'll put one in the chat. I can't talk into it at the same time, but if you Google MCAS practice tests, you can see for yourself what's on the tests. You can see it for every single grade. And I would say that it's quite eye-opening, because I think that it really is limiting in what it asks, in the sense of being prepared for life. And I think that's part of what happens in this requirement, is that it's putting an emphasis on, this is the stuff you need to know to be successful in life. And it doesn't, I feel like it's very, very limiting in that. I feel like that's what a lot of the teachers say. Of course, there are teachers who don't feel that way. Because that's the nature of having a question like this. There's always going to be both sides. And of course, no one side is always going to be 100% in support. All of the teachers that I know, and I know many because I have made it a goal of mine to pay attention to many of the teachers in Natick. And I do have a lot of friends who teach in other districts as well. I have friends who teach in Wellesley and friends who teach in Newton and Wayland, and they all feel pretty strongly that this is limiting in the sense that that 10th grade test that's the required for passing doesn't actually do the analysis that you're asking about. That's on the 3rd grade and the 5th grade exams for it. So it doesn't really give a lot of common sense questioning in the tests. It also is only in English. They only offer it in English. So it makes it extremely challenging for students who speak another language.
Rick and then Sarah.
Thanks, Brindley. I'm going to go up and look up the 7th grade test and see if I can pass it. I don't know. My question is, what you always hear is that, that the MCAS has been responsible for, improving the public education in Massachusetts from being very poor back before 1993 to being now very good. I just wonder if you can comment on that and share your thoughts on that, argument, which I think sounds superficially like the most persuasive argument for people who are not digging into this at all.
Sure. I believe that there is a place for standardized testing. I don't think it's bad that we do it. I do think that it helps a lot of students to go through the pressure of it, to go through the practice of it and the preparation for it. I do think that it makes economically what's the right word? Towns with a better economic viability. I do believe that it holds them a little more accountable, right? I can say for sure that if the MCAS requirement for graduation goes away, Natick won't change what it's doing, right? Natick works very, very hard for its profile of a graduate, right? For what it wants to see its students in their ability and in their success for life past high school. I do think that we will start seeing a few more weaknesses in lower economic towns, but I believe that that's the point of the test to begin with. And so if teachers in those communities and administration, right? It's administration really more than it is the teachers when it comes to this type of thing, because it will be the administration that sets the curriculum guide. The teachers don't set that. It's the administration that does it. So when you're looking at a town for how and what they require outside of what DESE requires, it's the school administration that does that. It's the superintendent and the head of learning. It is all of those people that put together the curriculum and the requirements for a student to graduate. So if they start lessening their standards, we will see that in the MCAS results. And then we will actually, as a state, and DESE as a governing body, will be able to see weaknesses better. This is just my opinion, of course, but this is how I understand how these types of standardized tests matter. Right now, the teachers really are teaching to the test. The test is very obvious. What they're going to test on is very obvious. And the ability to just teach those things to make sure their kids are passing that is a doable thing. If districts start changing how they do and allowing more, we will see weaknesses in areas and hopefully be able to address them better, hopefully be able to get those communities more money because it usually does require more money to make differences.
Yeah, thanks. Sarah and then Cindy.
So I'm going to swim against the tide here. Having grown up in what was at the time and still considered one of the best public school systems in the country in Newton, seeing what went on there when there was no such thing as MCAS, and there was no accountability while US history started, because the teacher thought it was more interesting, started in the mid 1800s, because since we at Thanksgiving drew a picture of made a turkey out of a handprint, and we blew up firecrackers on the 4th of July, we knew everything that we needed to know about US history until the 1800s. And having a teacher that sat and read a book while we did self-paced stuff. I mean, I understand that that was the times and things have changed, but seeing the education that our kids got in Natick compared to some of the stuff that I went through in Newton was night and day, in terms of accountability. I absolutely, having had a kid on an IEP and a kid on a 504, I absolutely and profoundly believe we need to make it easier for kids who have particular challenges. Judy spoke about how difficult it was to get kids through. And I absolutely say we need to tweak that, and or tweak is too trivial a word. We need to fix that. So I'm not, and I understand the English language thing. I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but I do really profoundly think the accountability does something to improve things. And in terms of teaching to the test, I feel like if teaching to the test is a problem, it's because the curriculum is wrong. I mean, theoretically, the curriculum is stuff we want kids to know, like kind of what Martin said. And if it's stuff we should know, then we should be teaching it. And if it's not stuff, if it's a waste of time to teach it, that's a problem with the curriculum more than the test. So anyway, and in terms of the stress, I mean, honest to God, my kids loved MCAS night or MCAS week because it meant there was no homework. And they were thrilled out of their minds. So MCAS week was a happy week in our household. So, certainly not everybody is stressed about this. So I will get off my soapbox. I know I'm swimming against the tide, but just some thoughts to throw out there.
Yeah, no, they're valid points. Let's take Cindy's comment or question, and maybe we should try to move on soon after that. But yeah, but go ahead, Cindy.
So I have two thoughts. One is a question that can be answered after the second thing. What students, who will be the students who don't graduate versus now, versus if MCAS as a requirement is, I mean, will there still be, should every student, if they attend school, be able to graduate? How do you even think about that? And I suspect that a lot of the students who don't graduate now or in the future would be students who simply don't come to school. And then my other thought was just in response to Sarah. I think the requirement, I graduated from high school in 1978, and at my school, and I think it was a state requirement, you had to take 4 years of English and 4 years of PE, and then the US history requirement was only since 1860. And then if you wanted to take the earlier one, you took pre-1860 US history. But it was too much. I think they wanted students to have a better grasp of the time from 1860 until, the 70s. Then if you go start back at the very beginning, it's just too much history to take and put in one year of required history. Just I don't know what the requirements are now.
So would you like me to respond to that, Doug? Is that
the first
Yeah.
question? I'd love to hear your response about my question. Yeah.
so currently less than 1% of students in Massachusetts don't pass because of the MCAS requirement. We have to remember there are
Don't pass
other
or don't graduate.
Don't graduate because of the MCAS. Sorry, don't graduate because of the MCAS requirement.
Oh,
There
okay.
are other requirements for graduation.
Yes.
And there are students who don't pass because of those. I didn't do an enormous amount of homework on that side because that's not a part of the test. I mean, a part of this ballot question. And that's a much bigger DESE question for requirements. But for the test specifically, it's less than 1%. And they are predominantly all, as I mentioned, English language learning students, students who really need it to be in a second language, or students with special needs who aren't able to jump through the hoops to get an appeal, and just aren't able to do this, but are able to have functioning lives and have functioning schools. In fact, many of the kids who fail, they fail by 1 point or 2 points, and they still have A's and B's in classes. So my understanding is that a majority of the teachers, including the Massachusetts Teacher Association, firmly believe that this isn't really an equitable or equal way of determining whether or not a kid has met all of the requirements for graduation. And in terms of curriculum, this won't. So if there's a no vote on this, there is no way to hold any district or the state accountable for curriculum. People have been complaining about the MCAS test for 20 years. I can go back 20 years and pull up people trying to take away this graduation requirement and take away the MCAS completely. Like, there are a whole group of people out there who want to take it away completely. I don't agree with taking it away completely. I do think that it's not bad for students to have to figure out how to take a high pressure test. I think that there are some kids who just aren't ever going to be able to function under that type of a stress level, and that shouldn't be their sole the sole thing holding them back from a graduation high school diploma. When I looked at the dropout rates, most of the kids who drop out of school actually already passed the 10th grade MCAS. So I have not been able to find a direct correlation between passing or not passing and it being a requirement versus dropout rates. If it's out there, I didn't find it. And what was the other one?
No, the other one was really just an explanation of, I think, why Sarah might have been frustrated that the class started in the mid 1800s, because I don't think.
Oh, right. Yeah. So
that was
I
just a
just-
comment.
Yeah, no, I just feels to me like if I didn't even learn beans about the Constitution of the United States and could be considered a high school graduate, that just seems odd to me.
I agree, but I do think that that's a bigger and a different question than this particular question.
Well, I guess that was
Yeah.
kind of my point about some of these objections actually fall all the way back to what is the curriculum framework or alignment or whatever the term is of, like, what is the state saying you need to learn? Maybe there's a problem with that. That's a different question.
Yeah.
And that is exactly why this has finally come to this point, because there are many people who feel, Sarah, that that's the biggest question, and that this test and the accountability for it doesn't actually make curriculum accountable. It doesn't do anything for the rest of the curriculum and fixing the rest of the curriculum issues that people have.
Okay. Thanks. We can definitely circle back to this question with any time that we've got remaining at the end, but I do want to kind of move us along. Rick, is there anything like really burning on this that you really need to get out?
Just really quick, I put the link to the Mass Core in the chat. That's where
thank
the
you.
Mass curriculum is. That's all. Thanks. Bye.
Good.
And thank you,
Okay.
Brentley. That was very helpful.
Yes, thank you, Brinley. It was helpful.
Yeah, and like I said, we can come back. I just want to make sure that we at least get a chance to talk about all 5 of them. And continuing with the Brinley show, and I apologize, Brinley, anything that you can share just as an overview of at least what this question really would mean about unionization for transportation network drivers. I know when I was talking about it with some of our kids, we were the opinion was, well, unionization is always good. Generally, it always helps workers and it's always an option, right? But I think people aren't forced to join the union, but I think I've heard some advertising of people that say workers that vote, that are saying vote no, saying this would wreck things for them. So there's clearly more there than I understand so far. So anything you could do to shed light, Brinley, or
Sure.
anyone else that's looked at this one?
Sure. So as I understand it, a yes vote is going to provide transportation drivers like Uber and Lyft the opportunity to form and create a union. Allowing them, so unions allow for collective bargaining as a group, right? So it's the, like, an example would be the difference between working for a company and getting a better insurance rate because you work for that company and the company was able to negotiate with the insurance company for better rates versus being self-employed and going it on your own. That's the best analogy that I can create for why this is happening. It is literally to give the riders an opportunity to band together to collaborate on benefits and working requirements, etc. This
The
is
drivers, not the riders, right?
right, and a no
Yeah.
vote doesn't change anything. So it just leaves everything currently the way it is. I believe that it is drivers themselves that have brought this ballot question and made this happen. In terms of monies being spent and what the Lyft and Uber corporate offices have to say, they've both come out saying that because of the negotiations that they just went through, they felt like they've already had a bit of a collaborative working relationship with the drivers because they did just change a bunch of things in terms of base pay and sick leave and insurance and a whole bunch of issues that the drivers have already been settled. They are not the statements from Uber and Lyft they are not publicly opposing this question. They do have some concerns with how some of it is written, but because this will then have to go to the legislature, if it passes, they feel that they can hammer out the fixes that they would need to see, so they're not spending money to say against it. The personal no side that I'm hearing from people is that they're afraid it's going to make rideshare more expensive. I think that's coming anyway, personally for me. So I don't know that a yes or no vote on this is going to prevent that. Prices from increasing. And a yes vote does not automatically create a union. It literally just gives them the legal right to form a union. Then they would themselves have to get together. They'd have to pass a vote. I can't remember. It's like two-thirds or it's a majority or a little more than a majority of their people would all have to vote yes to form the union, and then they would have to write the rules of it. I mean, it's a huge process from this vote to them actually unionizing. All this does is give them the right to unionize, and it would be a first in the country because right now they are seen as independent contractors and not employees, and law is right now that unions are for groups, right? The Teamsters are drivers. They form a union because they're employees of people. And so the interesting part of this is these are people who are considered independent contractors trying to unionize as opposed to a group of employees.
Okay, it's a good overview. Have other folks looked into this or have strong opinions one way or the other, particularly maybe for anybody that thinks that this is a bad idea? That would argue in favor of a no vote? Not seeing any hands or interest?
Oh,
Okay.
hang on. Yeah,
Yeah.
I voted no on this. The reason is, and I just put the link in the chat. Jeff Jacoby, who I disagree with about 90% of the time, I still read him sometimes, and actually on the ballot questions, I look him up because I wanted to hear a libertarian view. And what I like is not so much his opinions, but particularly on this question, he's informative of the facts. And if you'd like, I can read you quickly what he said on that.
Yeah, if it's brief, I think you said you put it in the chat. I don't
I
think it
put
got
it in the
there yet.
chat, but since we're in the discussion,
Yeah,
if people want to know it, geez, where'd it go? Hang on, oh, I did the wrong thing. Hang on. Yep, there it is. Just to go be. There it is. Okay. Brindley, for one thing, he says that it's the union would need, if this passes, the union would need support from only a tiny fraction of drivers, 5% of active drivers, which equals 2.5% of all drivers, to gain access to the name, address, phone number of every driver. Once 25% of active drivers signed cards supporting the union, all drivers would be required to submit to collective bargaining and union discipline. There would be no election. I'm voting no because the proposed law would be unfair to gig drivers who cherish the flexibility, and because I oppose forcing workers into a union against their will. He has other remarks. Do you want to think more about this one? Read it. You might agree with them. You might not. I just, my gut tells me this is not a good idea. Even though I'm for unions, it's not like being anti-union. And probably I'm falling prey to what, good old conservative GOP told you would happen with every industry that unionized, which is that, so, I may be duped on this one. I don't know. But in any event, it's an interesting experiment, and my vote isn't really going to be very decisive one way or the other. So,
yeah,
there it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, I think a lot of us would want to make conditions as favorable for workers as possible. But the question is, will this in fact do this or make it worse? Judy, I thought your hand had been up, but then came back down. No?
Yeah, I just, Brinley touched on it there at the very end of her presentation, that the idea of whether these transportation drivers are free contractors or workers has been tested in several courts, and the courts have come down and said, because of the requirements put upon them, that they have to be considered workers. And so for me, it's illegal for us to bar organizing by workers. Right, that's sort of a right that's been tested, as to my understanding, in employment law. So therefore, I'm leaning towards supporting.
Voting yes, yeah. And Bev, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, so I just, and I'd be welcome comments from others who know more than I do, but I thought I had heard that the unions actually were not taking a stand on this. And the reason is, just as was just mentioned, that that they consider gig workers to be employees, and they don't want this precedent to come down that they're being treated as contractors, because this ballot question would unionize them as contractors, not as employees. So that the unions, some of them want to hold out for a ruling that says they're actually employees and have a right to unionize. This is giving them a right that doesn't exist as contractors. So I don't have a strong opinion either way, but I'm kind of, sort of leaning toward wanting to give the opportunity to unionize, but I don't know if that would prohibit that next step of saying, actually, these are employees and they should get the same protections and benefits as employees. So if someone else knows more, please chime in.
Okay.
I find that very interesting. I hadn't heard a lot on that side. But so I found that the Tufts, this was one of the ones where I actually read all of the Tufts link that you sent. Was wonderful. Thank you, Doug, for sending that out. If you read the Tufts full analysis of this question 3, it's quite interesting. And they've put in there, I'll just say, the thresholds for unionization. Question 3 envisions a kind of ladder climbing process for union formation and bargaining. With support from 5% of active drivers, organizers would get access to the contract to contact information of all active drivers. With support from 25% of active drivers, they would become the official bargaining representatives of all rideshare drivers. This is if it passes. And then to complete a bargaining agreement, organizers would need a majority of votes from all drivers with at least 100 trips in the previous quarter. So I do think it is a little misleading to say that it's such a low number of votes, because it is a low number of votes to get it started, but it's not a low number of votes to actually make it through the whole process. I'm a member of 2 unions, and I spend a lot of time reading, about all the collective bargaining that we do. And it is, it's really not a low threshold once you're there. It's a lot more than that. And I kind of agree that it should be workers' rights to unionize and bargain for better working environments for themselves.
Let's hear from Rick, and then also Metro Works, and then maybe we can table for the time being, move on to the next question. So Rick.
Yeah, quickly, again, thanks, Brinley, for bringing that. I did not know that, and Jeff Jacoby left that out of his conveniently. However, he did read the first paragraph of it. I won't. It's not long. I won't read it all, but I do want to. It does remind everyone that in June, drivers won an incredible, benefit package. This is Uber, Lyft, DoorDash drivers won an incredible benefit package already, $32.50 an hour, multiple forms of paid leave, insurance, anti-discrimination protections, healthcare stipends. Yeah, that tells me that this is probably not going to pass with the drivers anyway, even if you vote yes, and it does go into effect. My hunch is they're not going to vote for it because I think they value their independence. I think most of them value their independence. Now, if the voting bar is somebody has to have done 100 trips in the previous year, then it would exclude a lot of people who are, really part-timers, and is that they may be doing long trips. It's not a number of trips. I don't know. I don't know what it would do for those who are counting on this as a way to do it and don't want to pay union dues because they're just not, doing it enough. And I'm afraid it reduces the number of total drivers, which I think helps takes cars off the road and has other benefits. This is very complicated. I'll stop talking. Make up your own minds. I've already voted, so
Nothing simple if you go deep enough. Let's take the MetroWorks question or comment and then go on to psychedelics. And we do have asset for everybody to take for this question. So go ahead.
Thank you. The low threshold, particularly at the beginning of the process, seems a little weird at first. But the argument I've heard is that, these people have no way to contact their fellow workers. It's not like people working in a location where they can be in contact and you could have organizers. So they're at a severe disadvantage compared to the companies, which can be contacting their they're not workers, they're not employees, but with their people, their workers anytime they want. So I think this is a way of equalizing. So I'm inclined to vote for this.
Thanks. Cindy, is it possible for you to hold your question and circle back if we have time, or is it something super quick?
Well, I'll ask the question. It's what with all the benefits that they have, why do they, what is it that they would want a union for? Is there a specific issue?
Yes, there are specific issues. If you listen to the drivers who are supporting this and out publicly for it and have been working to make this happen, there it is. Even though they're making that wage, there's no discussion about how much the corporate is taking of that wage. So there are things that they still want to work on that didn't happen previously, and they feel that this is the way to do them. One of them is how much the corporate can take. Right now, it varies dramatically for where you're doing it, the distance, all of
So
that kind of
the
stuff. So
quote
they,
for how much they make as a wage, that's not what they take home and then pay taxes on? That they have to pay some of that away to the company?
yes.
So why do they call it? So, all right, that's
So
whatever.
I haven't done an enormous amount of homework in that. That is just what I've been hearing when I listen to all of the pro and
Okay.
con reports
Okay.
from
I'll look
so
into it.
like I said, I didn't do and that much of in depth about it, but that's what they've been saying for what I've been hearing is that there are more things involved that they feel the corporate is not being upfront about, and then this is the way to fix that
Yeah.
in terms of.
Thank you, Brinley.
All right, yeah, thanks. And thanks to those of you that sent me the links for the various debates and Tufts analysis and so forth. So I haven't done any of this research myself. I've just been passing along on occasion the good stuff you guys have gathered. So, but let's move to question 4 now.
And I'd like to echo what Doug said. I had been leaning toward yes on question 3, and I think I still am, but you've given me stuff to think about, so thank you. So question 4 is also a question with it's one of these things, the more you dig into it, the more questions, at least for me, as I was looking into it, the more questions come up. So question 4 would it covers 5 different naturally occurring psychedelic substances, things like magic mushrooms and so forth. And it would create a process whereby it's the basic intent of it seems to be to try to give people access to the medical benefits that may be able to be achieved through using these psychedelic substances. That there's been research that shows they're helpful in people dealing with things like PTSD and certain forms of depression and certain mental health benefits that can be derived from this. And it would establish basically a process whereby if I feel like I would benefit from this, I would be able to go to a licensed facility where there would be facilitators that would help me through the process. They've found that it's much better for people who are using these substances to have somebody with them who can kind of guide them through the process. Some people can become agitated or upset, and having somebody they trust with them to help them through that is shown to make the process more streamlined and better for them. So there's a whole long administrative process that I won't go into in great detail, but that sets up an oversight, I forget what they call it, a commission, I think, that's like a small body that kind of sets the whole scene. And then there's a larger body that's kind of a technical advisory group that looks at things from a medical perspective and a cost perspective and licensing and public safety. There's all kinds of people that would be appointed onto these various groups. So there's a big administrative piece behind it. There would be tax on money to pay for all of this. Oversight comes from a tax on the use of the facility. If I go and have a psychedelic experience, there'd be a 15% tax on that. There's a licensing process for facilitators, and there's a fee associated with that that's supposed to cover that cost. What else? This is somewhat similar to a process they've gone through in Oregon, and I will get into that more in a moment. So there's this one big piece that kind of creates this framework whereby you could have access to these substances with mainly a mental health goal, not a recreational goal, but more of a health-oriented goal. Then there's a secondary piece or a different piece that says that they're going to decriminalize the possession of small amounts of these materials. So you're allowed to have as much as you can grow in a certain area, for example. So that basically, again, these substances remain illegal at the federal level. But in terms of the state and local authorities, they would stop, busting people for having some small amount of magic mushrooms kind of thing. So that's kind of the real outline shell of what this is proposing. The pro side says that this would provide mental health benefits that are not able to be achieved right now, and that that's the main goal is a health benefit thing. The anti side says we still don't know that much about these things. One argument that sort of caught my eye is there's 5 different substances that they are proposing to be covered by this, one of which is called ibogaine, which I had not even heard of until I started digging into this. But that one in particular seems to be for the people that are using on their own without any kind of supervision. That one seems to be linked with some cardiac effects. And so there is some concern from the medical community that there could be, if people are using in an unsupervised setting, there could be some downsides. There doesn't seem to be a lot of concern about getting addicted to these things in the same way that you can get addicted to opioids, for example. What else? I feel like I've been rattling on for a long time and still haven't gotten to everything I want to say about this.
That's a good overview, but
Yeah, so maybe that's a stopping point, and let people weigh in.
Want to say
So-
anything about what your own personal opinion?
My own personal opinion of this is,
Bring in Liz's expertise.
yeah, I sort of broadly speaking have always thought it's odd to criminalize the possession of something that occurs in nature. That just, I mean, I have never ever used any of these things, have no interest in trying them myself. But if somebody else does, and it's, this is different from something that's synthesized in a lab. These are naturally occurring things that human beings in certain cultures have used for a long time. And it has always seemed odd to me to make it illegal to use those. Having said that, so the reason I volunteered, after I just said I have no interest in using any of these things, the reason I volunteered to cover this one is that our daughter spent some time working for a company based in the Netherlands. That was one of the things where these things are legal, or at least psilocybin. I'm not sure. Maybe only psilocybin is legal there. But anyway, they were putting together a training course for these facilitators that I mentioned. Oregon has legalized psilocybin several years ago, and their program also included having these centers where there would be a facilitator. And the rollout in Oregon was tough. The company that she worked for suddenly imploded and left the people going through training on a limb. And I won't go down the long rabbit hole that they had to deal with. There were unintended regulatory consequences there. So there was the board that oversaw the whole psychedelic thing. But apparently there wasn't a lot of thought to the fact that there's also another regulatory agency in Colorado, or excuse me, in Oregon, that deals with any kind of postgraduate professional licensing. It's like a higher education that's not a straight up college or university. And those people got involved and it got very messy. I looked quickly and we do have a similar board like that in Massachusetts. So I feel like my opinion is I am generally in favor of decriminalizing this. I'm not sure this is exactly the way to do it. It feels like it's trying to bite off a lot at one time.
And our daughter has looked at it and I think feels the same way.
And she feels the same way.
It has some of the same structural flaws.
She looked at it and she said, I find myself, she said, I'm surprised that I'm leaning toward the no side, given her experience. But she had some issues with this. So I'm still pondering. I think philosophically I'm in favor of it, but I'm not sure if this is exactly the way to do it. And I'm still on the fence. So I'll throw it out for discussion.
All right, Cindy, you've got something to add.
So this is a question that actually applies to all 5 questions. Is my understanding, kind of vaguely, is that if citizens vote to yes on any one of these ballot questions, there is still a process that has to go through the legislature to make it law. And the legislature can tweak quite a bit of it to their satisfaction. So is it possible that they could, in this case, if it's voted yes, that they could address the concerns that people have? And does anybody know about that process for any of these questions?
That's a good question. I mean, we were saying that kind of with the auditor question that,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
gee, transparency is good, but if it's unconstitutional, it's not going to happen anyway.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah, that is a good question. And I think, clearly all the detailed procedures and regulations haven't been written yet. I mean, there's an outline in there, you shall make all these these two oversight bodies, and they're going to come up with the specifics. So there's certainly, there's a lot of wiggle room in there. I don't know specifically how to answer that question, if they would quote unquote fix it. I mean, what they see as its potential flaws might not be what I see as its potential flaws. So it's a good question and an interesting question, but I'm not sure
hmm.
I can't really say, oh yeah, it would come out fine, or oh yeah, it would be a disaster, or it'd be, I don't know.
Yeah. Let's let both Brinley and Bev weigh in. Brinley?
Sure. First, I can say that if you read again the Tufts thing, if you look at that for the options for the legislature, there are things that they can do to change this. I don't think that there's enough things that they can do, but there are some things that they can do. My personal thought of this is that, unfortunately, I have a lot of family history around this and have seen the effects of what can happen with some of these 5 substances, not all of them, but some of them. And I can say that so what this allows currently is 144 square feet of growth space, which is a 12 by 12 room, basically the size of a bedroom. You can grow an enormous amount of mushrooms in that space, like an enormous amount of mushrooms in that space. And this law permits for sharing without any requirement whatsoever. So you can share with your friend, you can grow these and share with your friends, and they don't need to have any medical need for it whatsoever. I have quite a bit of a problem with that. Some of these substances, some of these mushrooms, even though they are natural and growing, some of them really can cause serious health problems if you're not done right, or if you take too much. Some of them have what's called a delayed effect, where you can take them and not feel an effect, and so you take more, so that you can end up having a real problem. You could take some and think it's just a little bit, and then go out for a drive. I have a problem with the fact that in this particular, the way they've set it up right now, it doesn't need, when in the counseling and the clinic setup, that there is no requirement for it to actually have a medical person there advising and monitoring and all of that. These can be done with just non-medical clinicians. And I have a problem with that, because I believe that the medical benefit from these is very structured counseling to go along with it. I feel like this, because this is set up to be such a medical thing and not a recreational thing, that if the point of it is medical, I would want to see more restrictions. I do think that the Tufts does a really good job of helping this. I don't think they should be completely illegal. I think this one isn't the initiative to vote for. And it's weird for me to say this, because I voted yes for the marijuana, but I will be voting no on this one, because I think that the psychedelics and the hallucinogenics are much more dangerous. And I think this leaves too many openings for real bad problems.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Brinley. As I say, I also have a lot of issues with the 12 by 12 feet thing. And I know when my daughter looked at this, she was surprised. She said, this is weird the way they're bundling these together.
Yeah.
That, I think I said, it feels to me like they're trying to do too much with this. Maybe I didn't say that, but I meant to. That they're trying to accomplish sort of conflicting things with this law. I mean, there's the whole medically structured piece, but then there's the whole grow your own piece. And I don't know,
Yeah.
those are separate things.
I hate to rush us along, but I do want to have time for the tipped workers one. But Bev, I do want to let you have your
Okay.
say too.
I'll try to be quick. Just some information, not a viewpoint. Jim Browdy has done a lot of on Jim and Marjorie, the Radio Boston. He has done a lot of ballot initiatives. He said that the legislature can completely overturn it, can modify it, can do a lot. So just that was, I don't know if that's correct, but that was his perspective. The proponent of the no side is a doctor who had a patient who's in her 20s, had mild depression, took 2 bouts of ayahuasca, and ended up catatonic. And it took her 6 months and shock therapy to get back to the road to recovery. She was knocked into a really bad situation. So, and this was a patient of his. And so he's the no side. He actually said he would legalize it. He doesn't believe anyone should be held criminally liable for possession. On the other hand, the fact that it happened when it wasn't legal means it's already happening, and maybe having some structure around it would help. I have a friend in Oregon whose viewpoint was surprising to me. She said, well, it's great to have supervised locations, but they became so costly that the people in Oregon are not using them. She actually took something from a friend illegally when it was legal in Oregon, but you have to pay over $1,000 to go and use it. So I'm just throwing these things out there. I'm not taking a stand, but it's just more complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. And the training in Oregon was $10,000 or $12,000 to go through the training to get your license to be a facilitator, which is part of what's driving those high prices for the consumer, is that
Yeah.
the facilitators have to build that into the price, to recoup their expense to be
Yes.
licensed.
Oh, and one other thing is the doctor who was on the no side said that medical professionals are not even allowed to be there, maybe because of federal rules. I'm not sure why. I didn't quite understand that. That actually these have to be non-medical professionals, which kind of blew my mind. Anyway, just information.
Sounds like maybe not ready for prime time.
I
Yeah.
can say monetarily, this has had more big business money thrown at it than any others, except for the tipped workers. This one's had an enormous amount of big business money put into it.
Wow. All right. Well, let's move to tipped workers, and then, like I say, we can, for as long as folks want to stay, we can circle back to the other questions. But let's at least get that one covered a bit. And Brinley, back to you. Thank you so much.
So I will just preface this to say right off the bat that we are a divided house in my house on this one. So I will try to keep the beginning as neutral as possible. My understanding as this is a yes vote increases the required wage of tipped service workers from $6.75 an hour to $15 an hour, which is the current minimum wage, $15 an hour. It does this over a 5-year period, meaning there's a small increase this year, small increase this year. It's like percentages over the next 5 years, so that it's not just a dramatic, okay, all of a sudden tomorrow they have to pay all of their service workers $15 an hour. And it does allow for pool tipping, meaning the environments where tipping happens, such as restaurants. Some restaurants already do this, I will say, but it enables the tips to all be pooled so that even the kitchen workers and the dish workers and the other workers, the hostesses, all can be a part of the pool of the tips. That it could be divided evenly or half and half, 3/4 or whatever. It allows for pool tipping. The no vote makes absolutely no change to the current rules. So as I understand this right now is that, we're just going to use restaurant staff because I think it's the easiest one for people to understand. Restaurant staff, the servers, not the kitchen, and not the hostess, but literally just the servers, the people that are that legally qualify as servers. They make $6.75 an hour. They must claim their tips, and whatever tips that they don't earn, to give them $15 an hour minimum in their pay, the restaurant or the business must make up. So if they have, if they work 3 hours and in those 3 hours, their tips plus the 675 only equal to $14 an hour, then the business must make up that extra money for those 3 hours. Right now, they tipped workers do pay taxes on everything that they claim. Obviously, if there's cash, it's different than if it's on credit card. On credit card, all of the tips count because there's a record of them. If there's cash, you know, some people probably fudge with that. That's my understanding of how it works right now. My understanding is for the for and against arguments is that the for people are equity engaged people, meaning they don't think it's equitable for any industry to pay less than a minimum wage, and for their salaries and their income to be dependent on the public, which is kind of what this is, except for the fact that the restaurants do have to make it up to the $15. So it's not like they're actually can go walk away with $12 an hour or $11 an hour or $6 an hour, because if they're not making that money, the restaurant does have to make it up. So there is a little bit of a not quite so true in the people could make less argument, because they can't really in Massachusetts make less. The against, again, this has had a lot of money put into it by the restaurants associations and many other organizations, for the no, and the no would make no change. And the no argument is that tipped servers believe that their tips will start to go away if this happens, because people will think, oh, they're making $16 an hour, I don't have to tip anymore. And the majority, or at least the vocal majority of tipped servers, think that that's bad, because they actually make more than $16 an hour. They make between $20 and $30 an hour, depending on where they work and what they do. You know, people who work in a bar certainly make a lot more money when people are tipping $1 a drink than in a restaurant. And of course, it depends on what they get tipped, because the standard is 18 to 20% on service. So if you're going to a restaurant where it's $100 a person versus $15 a person, obviously the wait staff at the $100 a person is going to make a lot more than at the restaurant where it's a $15 per person type of meal. But I believe that's why they have this argument as to why they don't want it. And then on the business side, the reason that businesses are arguing for it is because, arguing against it is because in, for example, a restaurant environment, the labor costs is the biggest cost to overcome. And they really do feel as though, especially for the smaller restaurants and the smaller service tipped businesses, that if they have to cover all of that cost up to $15 an hour, that they would have to raise their prices too much to make a profit. I don't know if I can answer questions, but I'm happy to. And I can absolutely explain the two arguments going on in my house to the two different perspectives.
Brinley, if I could just ask a question too. I partially heard the radio debate on this one. And the folks arguing for seem to be saying that tipped workers now have that there's a lot of discrimination, that there's I'm struggling for the particular words, but just either there's cases of various forms of abuse against those workers because apparently they're kind of over a barrel. They have no power to fight back or something, and that this will it's partially at least kind of a social justice issue to provide better worker conditions. Had you heard that as well, or?
I have heard that a lot, and
I've also heard the Restaurant Association say, no, 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 that's not an issue at all.
I probably should have done more homework on that part. I did not do more homework on that part, but I have heard that argument.
Yeah.
I can imagine that if there is a lot of the service industry that relies on people that probably don't necessarily speak the language. I do think that there is probably that argument is probably truthful. I'm sure, like if you look at the Vineyard and places that have a massive tourist industry for the service workers there, that could be going on.
Yeah, yeah. I see both Rick and Bev have their hands up. Rick?
Yeah, just a quick thing before I go. I mean, the number of places that you're now tipping has gone way up. Like every coffee shop, every place that uses one of the little payware software, tap your card things now has an opportunity for tips. I wonder if, software would start coming out without that if this happened, because then you would have all of the employees at cash registers who are taking orders just like restaurant people do. I mean, often the restaurant person comes by, takes your order at the table, and then somebody else comes from the kitchen out and serves it. I mean, who's getting the tip? I don't know. This is just vastly confusing and a mess. So I voted no. Not that I have anything against paying people a minimum wage or have them making a minimum wage. I just think it's a mess. That's why I don't understand it. So I give up.
Yeah. Thanks, Rick.
So,
go ahead, Brinley, but let's go.
I can just say very quickly, full disclosure, I spent over 20 years in this industry, from every level of the nobody dish collector and the hostess all the way up to management, full blown restaurant head manager. I've been wait staff manager. I've been head bartender. I literally did this for over 20 years in every aspect of it. And I can say from my own perspective that the labor costs truly are the hardest part of making the restaurant industry work. And that I really do think that it's quite probable that we will lose some smaller restaurants if tipping changes. I also think that we might lose some what we always called lifers in the business, because they could make enough money to actually make this a job for them, meaning they could work during the day and do the job and make a living. And they're not getting rich and driving Lamborghinis, but they were earning enough wage to support their family because they could make upwards of $20 an hour. We are torn in this because in our house, Greg sees the other side, like what you were talking about, and he really does think that we should move that way. I personally think that this is probably not the way to go about it, in that because restaurants already do have to make up the difference, right? They already do have to make up the difference. That's already law. So what it could potentially do is take away the people who are willing to do this as a job. Or it could potentially mean that restaurants that we've really enjoyed, they're going to hire less people And so your waits are going to be longer. The service is going to be longer. The service will probably be a little more transient. These are just my opinions of having been in the business for so long. I am going to vote no on this, and Greg's going to vote yes. I do think it's both sides. I do think there's more into it. I really do think that we'll see small businesses hurt.
Okay. And Bev, your comments?
Yeah, so in DC, they've had a short experience with this and so far haven't seen tips going away. There are some restaurants who put in a quote unquote service charge, and there's a confusion around that because that's kind of making up their extra costs. It's not in lieu of a tip, and a lot of people think it is, and so there's confusion around that. The no side has been saying that these are outsiders from California that are promoting this and spent a lot of money on it. But the guys that I heard speak, the two people that I heard speak on the yes side said, no, it's actually been going on for 10 years in Massachusetts, started by two wait staff in Massachusetts who wanted this to happen. And the one in particular was talking about the fact that a lot of restaurant workers are immigrants and are afraid that if they speak up, that they will have consequences, and so that there's a lot of wage theft that the restaurant owners can get away with, especially for lower end. Now you have to be pretty proficient in English to be a wait staff getting tips, so I'm not sure how valid that is, but there's also apparently difficulty in keeping track of your your tips to make sure you get up to the $15. And if you are afraid of your status, then your employer can get away with not making it up to 15. But I gather in Massachusetts, it's way more than 15 is the average. Just again, some facts to throw out there. There was one other, and I'm not thinking of it, but yeah, anyway, if I think of it, I'll say something. But I appreciate Brinley's perspective. But oh yes, there's one other important factor, which is those people who are wait staff who are trying to get tips, and I want to say especially that's true for women. You have to put up with a lot of really bad behavior, including come-ons, if you want to get your tip. And so there's some harassment issues that I've heard about. Brinley, I'd love your take on that.
I can tell you 100% as a woman in the business for a long time that the harassment issues are there. I do not think this will solve that problem. It is, and I am guessing, even though I've been out of it for 20 years now, I am guessing that it is still a male-dominated industry in terms of the higher ups, right? The managers, the people in charge. It's the cooking restaurant world has been very male dominated for a very long time, and I am sure that still exists. I do not know if this will fix it. I think that's maybe where my concern is that I think that all of that is happening, and I don't know that changing this is going to fix all of that. So I don't know. I do know, according to the Tufts one, that DC is the only place working on it right now, and no other state has done this. So we would be leading the charge in terms of the rest of the country.
Just one comment on the harassment is the one that I'd heard was actually from customers. So if you're a woman as a wait staff relying on a tip from a man who's coming on to you, you can't resist too strongly or you don't get a tip. So that's the harassment that I was referring to. But you're right, it's also within the restaurant's chain itself, the chain of command.
Definitely on both sides. You are not wrong. You are not wrong for that. It's definitely on both sides. I will say I do think that that's probably not as prevalent as it used to be. I do think we, especially in Massachusetts, have probably progressed past that a little bit. I'd like to think so. But I don't know for sure. I'm not in it anymore.
Thank you.
I do think that there is a bigger issue with this that I think Rick brought it up with the fact that everything now seems to be tipping. And that sometimes you have to make a point for it to not happen because they've turned it all into the computer. You know, when you sign your thing, it's just there sometimes. I do think that is as big a part of the issue, because I think a lot of people are feeling over tipped right now. It has become the tipping world has become so huge. That's the complaint that I hear the most of the time when I talk about this, is that people are like, well, if they're making a minimum wage, I'm probably not going to tip 20%. I'm going to leave them a couple of bucks. Because I have to tip my teachers, I have to tip this person and that person and the mailman and the this and the that and the everything. And I think that the culture has become so tip everybody, instead of it being I'm tipping my mailman once a year because I appreciate him person type of thing. As opposed to tipping being an appreciation, it's become, I think a lot of people feel like it's become a requirement. And so I think that's why the people who say no on this feel that tension rising, and feel that that's why the tips will end up eventually going away.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Well, we are after 10:30. See, Rick's getting ready to leave us. He's got his hat on there. But thanks, everyone. This has been great discussion as usual. Turns out all of these questions are a lot more complicated than perhaps first thought, but I really appreciate the folks that did the research and the presentations and all of the back and forth. We may feel more confused, but I think we're still better informed than we were. So
Exactly.
the objective. Currently, next week, we